back here on Overtime on WOTM. We'll talk now college football. Mark, Auburn and Alabama, two programs kind of going in different directions. Alabama clinching the SEC West with a win over Arkansas. Meanwhile, Auburn losing on the road against South Carolina. We'll start with the Crimson Tide, who punched their ticket to Atlanta officially. I know we had a graphic last week with a bunch of scenarios.
Yeah.
that didn't last very long.
No, it didn't.
So Alabama is officially in, and also winning against Arkansas, but I think a lot of people are saying this team's still not blowing teams away. Meanwhile, Bryce Young still on fire, 559 yards, 5 touchdowns on Saturday. What do you make of the Tide now as they get set here for rivalry week against the Tigers?
Going into the season, everyone expected Alabama to be in a national title hunt. They still are. That's the most important thing to remember. They hold destiny in their own hands. How they get there really is, who knew how they were going to get there?
Right.
You didn't expect them to lose to Texas A&M after you saw Texas A&M play a couple games and lose a couple games. But if somebody were to tell you when the season began, hey, Alabama's only loss heading into the Iron Bowl would be at Texas A&M, you would probably take that if you were an Alabama fan with the uncertainty of the offense and figuring the defense was going to carry the load for most of the year. That is not what happened. Bryce Young played his best game of the year on Saturday, the most dominant I've seen him. Anytime he needed to answer back, he did. Even going past where the offense makes mistakes, like that fumble, inside the 5-yard line, the defense then makes the big stop when they have to, when the game is on the line, which was good to see because you figure if they're vulnerable, they're going to give up a big play in that spot like they've gave up all day on like a back shoulder pass again and then running away from the defense. I don't know how that happened. But those types of things have happened way too much this year. And I think every Alabama fan got kind of caught like, wait a minute, this isn't supposed to happen. We were up 31-14 at one point here. This shouldn't be a 6-point game with them with the ball. But their defense made the stop. And then Bryce Young again. What a beautiful pass to Jameson Williams to clinch the game. And you normally don't see an Alabama quarterback throwing for 400 yards. 500 yards, almost 600 yards. Every one of them needed. And it was a big coming out moment for Bryce Young. Maybe his Heisman moment. We'll get to that a little later. But I think that Alabama did what they had to do. It wasn't pretty. I would have liked to see them dominate more defensively. They didn't. But you know what? They still came away with a win. They still head into Auburn knowing they have to beat Auburn for the championship game to mean something. And going into there, you have a quarterback that can single-handedly keep you in the game. It's going to keep Georgia's defense guessing. They never seen anything like this, Georgia's defense, like Bryce Young. And he's getting better and better every week. I have a stat in the last 5 games, what he's done, 18 touchdown passes, almost 370 yards per game, completing 70% of his passes. I mean, real filthy stats that Georgia is going to have an answer for. And can they answer back with Stetson Bennett? I don't know. But we'll find out.
And to me, you see this trend with Bryce Young. And as you mentioned, I think it's a good point. He's gotten better each week. And I know a lot of people are really kind of frustrated because the running game hasn't been on par the way that it usually is. But this year, it's trending in the right direction. The passing game is. And the passing game, as of right now, it's kind of looking like the way it did last year with Mac Jones. He got better and better as the season went along. Now, is it at the cost of a run offense? That part, I think time is yet to tell because they'll still face a Georgia team who I think is strong against the run and the pass.
But here's the other thing you got to recognize. First time in Alabama history, you have 2 wide receivers with 170 receiving yards in a game with some great Alabama wide receivers. Jerry Jeudy, Devonta Smith, Henry Ruggs. All those guys come in. They couldn't do it as a pair with Tua and Mac Jones. But we have Bryce Young doing it with Jameson Williams and John Mechie. 2 guys who are as dynamic as they can be. Jameson Williams is a superstar. He's a stud. It's hard to compare anybody to Devonta Smith last year. He was just out of the world extraordinary. But He's been very, very good, almost in the same category as Amari Cooper or Judy or anybody else. He makes big catches. He always seems to be involved in a big play. He's always around there somewhere. Right. And same thing with Mechie. Mechie's been a lot more reliable with and he dropped one ball that, you know, or maybe he had to run a lap or something after you know, Saban yelled at him when he gets to the sideline. But most of the time, Mechie's been able to come up with a big catch here and there. And I think those two weapons are key for Alabama. Brian Robinson running the ball is always a threat. Maybe he's not as dynamic as Najee, but you don't have to be. Like everybody, well, they're not Alabama of last year. I mean, they don't have to be.
Yeah.
You know, Alabama last year was historic.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
You know, they're still good this year.
Exactly. Head coach Nick Saban met the media today and talked about some of the things that Mark did, highlighting some of the positives and especially being able to win in a tough situation at home on Saturday.
You always have to respect the competitive character of the players whether they have to make stops at the end of the game or, you know, we have to move the ball at the end of the game, whether it's to take the air out of it or, you know, score. So these experiences are always beneficial, I think. And certainly we've had our share of them this year. But I think the focus is, you know, to keep players playing one play at a time and not look at the scoreboard, and maybe that helps you execute, you know, down the stretch a little better.
Meanwhile, the Auburn Tigers lost at South Carolina. It's once again a game that they had the lead in, and they squandered the lead, and now that part is now over as the Auburn Tigers now fall once again. They fall to South Carolina at South Carolina. What did you make of the Auburn's #1 performance overall, but then kind of where they stand at this point in the season trying to evaluate this football team, which of course has had a lot of injuries?
It's hard to figure out Auburn. I mean, I thought that they were at a point where they would get to the Iron Bowl with one loss and that this was going to be like one of those historic Iron Bowls.
Right.
Okay? It didn't work out that way. Losing against Texas A&M was understandable. Okay, you're on the road. They're very good defense. They beat Alabama. You know, that can be understood. Losing against Mississippi State when you had a 28-3 lead at the half wasn't as understandable.
Right.
And now losing to South Carolina. I mean, come on.
Right.
South Carolina at South Carolina. We had said last year, first time since 1933 losing there last year, and they lose there again back-to-back years. Is South Carolina a program that is capable of winning against every team? Probably not. I don't know. I don't see them beating Georgia or coming and beating Alabama or even beating like maybe an Ole Miss.
Ole Miss, right.
But they played well enough to beat Florida.
Right.
Okay, I remember that. Now I know Florida, it's like kind of everyone likes to gang up on them now. But this was still a team that took Alabama to the brink. And they were good enough to beat an Auburn team, which I thought at one point was the second best team in the SEC West.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. This is an Auburn team that I think not even a month ago, or probably about a month ago, we were looking at them in a very different light.
Absolutely.
We were looking at them in a light of, hey, could they hang around there and keep up with the Arkansas at the time, but definitely Ole Miss, definitely Texas A&M.
Yep.
Auburn was kind of in that hunt.
Sure.
Is it a deflating thing that they are where they are now at 6-5? Or is it one of those situations where you just have to chalk it up to first-year head coach, ton of injuries, and it was kind of fool's gold more so than it was real substance with the team?
I wouldn't say it was fool's gold because they beat some good teams.
Yep.
Okay, they beat an Arkansas team that had dominated Texas.
Right.
They had dominated some big, very good SEC teams. They came within a 2-point conversion of losing to Ole Miss because they decided to go for 2, and then they beat Ole Miss.
Exactly.
Okay, so they beat some really good teams. They beat LSU on the road. So they played good football against good teams, and I thought they played pretty well against Georgia for most of the game.
Right.
Them losing again to Texas A&M was kind of understandable. You expected Bo Nix to have a stinker in there some of the way, but you didn't expect them to fall apart defensively when early on in the year their defense was pretty good.
Exactly.
And you didn't expect them to have consistent problems running the ball.
Right.
Problems for them. I mean, maybe getting 150 yards a game might be good for some teams, but it's not Auburn quality.
Exactly.
And they need to rush for over 200 yards a game. They need to consistently pound the ball to open up the passing game. They weren't able to do that. I didn't like how they treated T.J. Finley. We're talking about a quarterback last year who went 21 for 24, 265, 2 touchdowns, playing for LSU against South Carolina.
Right.
I thought they were way too conservative offensively. They didn't open up the game enough.
Yep.
He can do some things throwing the ball deep. They didn't even try. But then you wonder, okay, are these wide receivers good enough? They have a high drop rate.
Right.
You know, you don't know. They can make a great play one play and then a horrible play the next. So maybe that was there. They didn't want to hurt his confidence. They didn't want to give him too much. Whatever it was, I thought they were way too conservative. But overall, I think Carson's done an admirable job considering what he was up against when he got the job.
Right.
Yeah, he took over. The press conference was on Christmas Eve last year.
Right.
So he's done a pretty good job in his first year. And you have to understand, too, what do you expect out of Auburn?
Yeah.
I think most people would have said, okay, if you were at one point hanging into that Texas A&M game with one loss, you would have taken it.
Yeah, definitely.
And, I mean, they just happened to play bad in the second half against Mississippi State, play bad all game against South Carolina. You know, after a 14-0 lead against South Carolina is nothing to brag about, but not being able to hold on to it is really embarrassing.
Right.
So I think they're a little embarrassed after this game. And I don't know if they really should be, because overall, when you look at the core of what they've done this season, I think it's pretty positive.
Right.
You know, and I would hope they would take that into consideration. I don't expect them to win on Saturday.
Right.
But I expect them to put up a fight.
Yeah.
You know, but again, they're going up against probably the first or second best team in the nation.
Exactly.
So it's not like they're supposed to win. You know, they're supposed to, play hard, not make mistakes, do what Auburn does, run the ball well. If they can do those things, they'll be in the game.
Exactly. I think not freaking out, I think, is kind of the key now for Auburn Nation, especially when you consider the team that's coming next year or next week to Auburn, an Alabama team. Nick Saban's first year, 6-6, lost to Louisiana Monroe. So
Right,
I mean, we can kind of calm down there on all the kind of chatter and the freak out and the panic mode. Meanwhile, Brian Harsin met the media today and talked about exactly that, just trying to focus on getting better this week.
You know, we're certainly excited about the opportunity to go out there and get ourselves ready for this week to play our best football of the year, which is always the goal every single game, and to stay focused on the things that we need to do for this team to be more successful. And, I think our guys, as we come out to practice on Tuesday, taking what we've learned from the season so far, we need to apply that. And that will show up. We'll put in, a week's worth of work where, we feel accomplished after each and every day. And hopefully the next day we're out there to prove ourselves again before we ever step on the field to play.
Coming up next here on Overtime, we are joined by a special guest. We'll talk big-time rivals in this week's upcoming matchups, especially a huge one in the Big Ten. You don't want to miss it. Coming up next.